We will start off with opening comments, and Mr. Mattingly, we're just going to start off from that end and work that way.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
I appreciate the opportunity to be here tonight with you. My name is Matt Mattingly. I live on South Street here in Gorham. And since coming to Gorham 10, 12 years ago, I have done nothing but tried to participate in working to make this town a better place and the community a better place to live and raise a family and run a business. I am running today for a number of reasons, and here simply to do one basic thing, and that is to ask the people of Gorham the honor and the privilege of serving you in Augusta. We have a lot of issues that we need to face. This is one of the greatest places to live, the state of Maine. But that doesn't mean we don't have a long way to go in making it even better. Simply some of the issues that are at the top of my focus. One, dealing with the opioid crisis in the state of Maine. That is one of the things to me that we can solve. We can take this issue and we can solve this. We're smart enough. We're educated enough. We can deal with this issue. Another one issue that I'm desiring to work forward towards is to help businesses overcome growth restrictive regulations, and we have certainly a lot of them. We have a poorly codified appeal process in the state that makes it very difficult for businesses to move forward. We need to create incentives to encourage out-of-state investment back here in the state. In doing so, we grow the number of jobs, we secure our economy, we make this place certainly a better place, and we also promote local economic development. So those are just a few of the top issues that I hope to work on for you in Augusta. And I appreciate your time.
Thank you, Ms. Terry.
Hi. First of all, thank you for the town, for hosting this event. I think it's very important that the town gets to know who their choices are for representing them in Augusta. Since June, I've been going door to door to meet the people of District 26. I feel super fortunate that I've been able to hear the diversity of what's important to our neighbors. Just a little bit about myself. I was a chef in the restaurant business for 25 years. I worked days, nights, weekends, and holidays, and raised my family as well. In my time in business, the majority of it not only was cooking, but managing everything from a 4-person operation to a 30-person team. And about 4 years ago, I left the restaurant business full-time to start my own small food production company out of my home. I do still work part-time as a chef while I continue to grow my business. I've lived here in Gorham for 16 years, and we chose this town because of the close proximity to the village, the great school district for our children, and the apparent sense of community as soon as we drove into town. Other than managing my management experience from work, I've spent countless hours volunteering for different organizations in town. I was on the board of the Gorham Cooperative Preschool for 7 years, the Gorham Educational Foundation, and I currently manage the Gorham Farmers Market, and I'm the president of the Gorham Swim Boosters. I love Gorham, and I love Maine, and I think it is the very best place on earth to live and raise your family. However, I worry that once my kids complete their education, that they won't be able to return home to raise their own families. My oldest is in college right now, and I hope that she'll be able to come back and pay back her college loans, but my fear is that she will not be. My hope is that she, unlike her father and I, will be able to have one job coming out of college and not have to work constantly to make ends meet. We have an excellent reputation for hard-working people, and I think with incentives and encouragement, small and large businesses can thrive in Maine.
Thank you. As we said, or as I said earlier, we're going to be rotating the questions throughout the evening. So we're going to start with District 26. The question is, do you want to raise the minimum hourly wage of $7.50 to $9 an hour in 2017, with an annual increase of $1, increasing up to $12 in 2020? We're going to start with Ms. Terry.
Thank you. Nobody that works full-time in the state of Maine or anywhere in my opinion, should be living in poverty, and that is the case with far too many Mainers. There is an argument that raising the minimum wage will put teenagers out of business, will get rid of first jobs, and I do disagree with that completely. There's also an argument that the restaurant business would not be able to survive on a minimum wage that's higher than what it currently is, and I also fully disagree with that, having been in the business, having paid my employees far over the minimum wage. I think it's a great thing for people to be able to actually make enough money that they can pay their rent or their mortgage, buy food, pay their electrical bill, and then eventually someday retire. I see very little problem with raising, especially for the first year, a person's wage by $1.50. It's around $50 a week. It's certainly a doable thing for most small businesses. There will be challenges, of course, as there always are when something new happens, but I think with enough discussion that those challenges can be met and the people of Maine can actually have a productive life, not in poverty.
Thank you. And Mr. Mattingly, your response.
Thank you very much. You know, the interesting thing is here, my opponent doesn't actually believe what she just told you. Anyone who has been in this industry for any amount of time understands the truth. And the reality is, in this area of Maine, those that earned the tip credit don't make minimum wage. They make far in excess of minimum wage. In my own little restaurant while we ran it here, that actually my opponent was part of when we began, they were in between $20 and $30 an hour. Now again, we did not employ individuals full time, so this was not their only means. But this is clearly an issue that is terribly misstated. The Maine thrives on a tourism industry, and a huge component of this is our culinary tourism. We attract people from all over the world. We are the #1 culinary destination in the entire world. And if we take this, now Minnesota tried this. Minnesota tried this in 1984. They eliminated their tip wage credit. Now that means that, for those of you who don't understand that, that means that it's the waiter and the waitress is making roughly half minimum wage, and the tip makes up the balance. But that's not what they actually make. They do make minimum wage regardless of what the tips amount to, because we pay them that. We cannot pay them anything less than minimum wage. So please don't think that they're earning, $3 or $4 or $5 an hour, because they're not. But Minnesota in 1984 eliminated the tip wage credit. It took their restaurant industry 20 years to overcome the effects from that. 20 years. They have only now begun to come through the disastrous consequences. And this is a major piece of our tourism. This is a major piece of our economy. And here's the other thing that people aren't talking about it. In Augusta, on the desk, the legislature and the Senate voted to table a minimum wage increase to $10 an hour. That would have been immediate. And on the other side of the aisle, it was tabled. Instead of addressing it direct and forward and straight, they tabled it instead of dealing with the issue.
Moving back to District 26, the Maine Clean Election Act established a voluntary program of full public financing of political campaigns for candidates running for governor, state senator, and state representative. What do you think about that program, and have you used it? We'll start with Ms. Terry.
I have not used it. I'm the newbie here. I haven't run for public office before. So weighing both sides, we decided to go with the traditionally financed campaign. However, I do think it's an excellent idea. I think it keeps all kinds of special interests out of politics in general, which is also an excellent thing. And I think that it helps, if there's if everybody feels the same way about clean elections, if everybody runs a clean election, then it's easier to have a level playing field for candidates as well. I think we need to make things easier for the voter. Having clean elections would certainly make things easier for everybody, knowing that their what is coming out of their mouths is coming out of their hearts, not necessarily out of somebody's checkbook.
Thank you. And Mr. Mattingly, your response.
Thank you very much. You know, it's interesting. Doesn't take special interest money out of politics. It simply moves it from one point to the other point. Now, we've created a situation where candidates are literally forced to take it, and I don't hold that against them at all. But in the end, we have such staggering issues that we need to deal with. My opponent mentioned the poverty issue earlier. So we're diverting money, your tax money, into paying for people's aspirations to run for political office, but we're not dealing with poverty. You know, since 1934, you know, with the war on poverty, you know, if we want to go into that area, you know, we have spent trillions and trillions of dollars. And here in Maine, we have a poverty issue. We have issues. We have an underclass of people that need training, that need education, that need the ability to rise above of where they are today. And yet we're going to divert millions of dollars into local political races. And it doesn't make sense. It doesn't make fiscal sense. And it simply is nothing more than the desire to move money into the special interests. That is actually what drives this, is the special interests. And if we want to remove the special interest money and the influence from it, we simply have to say no more. We're not going to accept it as people, as individuals, as a community. We look at our initiatives, look at our ballot initiatives. We have right now, almost every ballot initiative that we have on there comes from a special initiative outside the state of Maine. What are we doing here? Why are we? It takes about $60,000 to get a special initiative on our ballot. So if we want to say the sky is green, someone will fund that. And we can put a ballot initiative together that will have us vote on whether or not the sky is officially going to be green. That's how insane this has become. We have to stop it. We have to end the special initiative money. We have to end your taxpayers' money going into politics, and this is how we do it. We end it. Thank you.
Thank you. Moving back to District 26, in recent years, the state has repeatedly taken revenue-sharing funds to help balance the state's budget. By state law, those funds should be going to local towns like Gorham. The towns have no recourse except to raise local fees and property taxes. What is your position on this practice by the state? Mr. Mattingly, we'll begin with you.
Well, the question alludes to that the state is simply, you know, grabbing money and pulling it away from the municipalities, and that's not necessarily the truth of the matter. There's a budget overlap of when our Maine's peak earnings season comes in, when tax revenues fall, in which they're making projections for it. But the reality of this, and this is something that I would propose should I be elected, is that we need a truth in budgeting process. Actually, at the municipality level, we need a truth in budgeting process. The municipalities, right here in our own town, we witnessed this year, and we see this often. As soon as the idea that we will see a cut in revenue sharing come in from the state, all of a sudden we hear the town manager crying. And this is a case where the emperor has no clothes. And it is very simple and where you don't know the reality until the revenue projections are fully, until the process goes down the road, until you actually see what are the revenues going to be. But in the meantime, we have the municipalities crying and complaining that, oh, they're cutting our revenues, we're going to have to raise your taxes. But the truth is, the town of Gorham and many other towns throughout the state hide a certain amount of money inside their budgets, and the municipalities must have a truth in budgeting process, and they hide the surplus. The surplus is set aside every year, and it's actually in the budget, but if you don't know what it's called, you won't see it. And here in this town, we call it Capital Part B. Now, over the last 10 years, we have had over $10 million of surplus in this budget, almost enough to fund the town for an entire year. And yet, numerous times, we've had the town manager crying and complaining, oh, we're going to lose taxes, we have to raise your taxes, we're going to lose the revenue. But that's not the reality. The budget process is not clear. It is not concise, and it needs to be direct, forward, and fully transparent so that all can see that when there's a surplus, the towns need to tell you, we have a surplus, because right now it's being hidden throughout the state. Gorham's not alone in this, and we need to change that.
Thank you, Mr. Mattingly. Ms. Terry, your response.
There are towns that actually do not have money. We are fortunate that, our services haven't been cut and our taxes have been raised, not by a ton, but every little bit counts for sure. The town that my husband grew up in had no money for snow plowing a couple of years ago. They lost all of their revenue sharing to the state, or the majority of it, and they were without snow plowing services, and that's pretty heavy duty. We're super lucky, I guess, to live in a part of the state that is relatively prosperous. We do okey dokes. There are parts of the state that don't do as well as we do, and suffer for it. If revenue sharing is taken out of Gorham, we have clearly had the means to fix the problems. A lot of Maine towns, that's not always the case. As a legislator, you are certainly working for your town, without a doubt, representing the people of your town, but you are also trying to help the rest of the state. It is my opinion that the rest of the state needs, in some cases, more help than we do.
Thank you. So for the next question, we're actually going to treat this as a group question, so we'll move through all 4 candidates. You'll all have the opportunity to answer this question at this time. And the question is something that we've seen at many levels of government. Do you want to allow the possession and use of marijuana under state law by persons who are at least 21 years of age? Why or why not? And Ms. Terry, we'll start with you.
Okay, well, for starters, as it's a ballot question, it will be up to the voters of the entire state for this. So my personal opinion on it is that financially we can do very well with marijuana being a regulated drug. There are so many questions that will need to be answered. There are so many regulations that will need to be put into place for it to become a law that that law enforcement can keep up with. But financially, it would be an enormous boon to the state of Maine. I think that we would need to make sure that the current growers for medical patients weren't affected by any new laws. But those are all things that the legislature will work out once the ballot is passed, or if it's not.
Thank you. Mr. Mattingly.
Thank you. You know, unfortunately, this would take far more than 2 minutes to discuss in its depth, but ultimately it boils down to one thing. I recognize that what I think personally, what people want to grow in their backyard and smoke in their own living room, that's not my problem. That's up to them. That's fine. I'm more of a libertarian when it comes to that. Don't cultivate it for sale to my kids on the street. You know, don't go out and peddle it. But right now we have a crisis at our hands. We have an opioid issue. We have these kitchen table cocktails that are coming up, that are popping up in hotel rooms and rental houses, of people creating these drugs that are killing people, that are absolutely murdering off people because they are an uncontrolled substance. And you know, we have one issue. We should probably deal with the one issue before we decide that we're going to add yet one more issue to the case. Now, I do think there are that medicinal use and derivatives from marijuana, from the THC products, have a very serious role in the future of our healthcare. Our pain management system, a lot of our addicts come from the pain management system. They become addicts under the care of a doctor. I was speaking with a woman just a short while ago while a company was shooting a documentary north of Bangor on the opioid crisis, and this woman was saying, I became an addict and never once touched recreational drugs. And that really struck me, and I realized at that point that we have people that under the care of our health system are becoming addicts. And yet we're dealing with the opioid issues and the synthetics that are coming in. We have to take this, a three-legged stool that we have to approach this on. We have to prevention, we have to do treatment, and we have to do enforcement. And if all three of those legs of that stool aren't on the ground, it's not going to work. Adding marijuana to the issue, it's not a good deal right now. It's not a good deal.
Do you want to add a 3% tax on individual Maine taxable income above $200,000 to create a state fund that would provide direct support for student learning in kindergarten through 12th grade public education. And we'll start with Mr. Mattingly.
Thank you. You know, if you look at the list of the districts that will benefit from this, in fact, the area that my opponent spoke about that didn't have money for snow plowing, you can pretty much guarantee that their school district is not going to receive a penny of this tax. This takes us to a whole new level. You know, when we are struggling to keep our young people here, to provide jobs for our young people, to provide an economic environment for them, this group of people that are $200,000 and above, these are the job producers. These are the people that are running large businesses, that are the people that we want to attract to the state. So here's a great idea. Let's create the second highest tax rate in the country. That'll make them want to come here. This is the most absurd thing. And again, we mentioned this, taking money out of politics, taking special interest money out of politics. This is one of those issues. This was brought to us by special interest groups, people that do not live here, that do not try to have a living here, that don't run businesses here, that don't employ people here. And this is one of those very simple cases where special interest has come to us and said, here's a brilliant idea, let's tax the wealthiest among you, and we'll funnel it into the schools. Well, it's not going to help all the schools. It's going to help some of the schools, and some of them will benefit greatly by it. And I'm sure every school could use some extra money. But this isn't the way to do it. This has nothing to do with helping grow our economy and our base, because we want our schools to thrive off of one thing, and that's the strength of our communities and the strength of our economy, and that's where it comes from. This is just, let's hide the shell game, let's move things around, and let's tax those that are creating, because if they leave, they're going to take their businesses with them, they're going to take their companies with them, and then what's going to be left? We will be left burdening the rest of that. Those people in that category, in 2012 alone, they donated $227 million to charities in the state of Maine. That group alone, by themselves. I think that says enough.
Thank you. Ms. Terry, your response.
This is also a question that I struggle with. I think giving people different tax rates with the amount of income that they make is it's questionable from time to time. That being said, this group of Maine residents have benefited from several tax cuts in the past few years. So bringing it back to maybe where it should be might be helpful for other schools, to help with schools if it's specifically going to schools. The Maine voters decided that the state would pay 55% of public education costs 12 years ago, and they did not. They have not. So, again, it's a ballot question, so the voters will decide on this, and then once the voters decide, it will go into legislation. And when it does, making sure that that money that was raised from a tax increase does, in fact, go to all schools, not just schools here in Gorham or in Scarborough or in York County, but in schools in the rest of the state that need the money just as much, if not more, than we do.
We're going to go back now to District 26 and give you two the opportunity to talk about regulations in the state of Maine, whether they're too stringent, and a specific example that you can give of a regulation that you may feel is overreaching. So we'll start with Mr. Mattingly, your response to this issue.
I'm number one, but that's okay. I'll go first.
Okay.
I kind of feel over the last 2 years that my face should be painted on the milk carton of overregulation. I personally have been fighting against issues that have forced the closure of one of my businesses, that have forced the layoff of a number of people, all because of the interpretation of regulations coming from at the municipality level. And it's something that has the ability to, in the end, destroy family after family, business after business, and income after income. And it's something that we have to come to terms with. We have this idea that home rule knows best. But when home rule, and by that I mean you have laws that are being passed, and at the policy governance level, that's black and white, but at the management level, it's all gray. So, and that's where we get into this whole issue of interpretation and reading rules and regulations. And if you don't interpret them with a reality, and you don't interpret them in a way that makes sense for the situation that you're involved in, then the result from that can be catastrophic. And in my case, it resulted in the closure of a business and the laying off of a number of employees. And it's all because of interpretation, and it didn't need to happen. I have a little tiny dining room, 16 seats, yet the town of Gorham decided they were going to use mass gathering code inside this little room of 16 seats. Well, that's for 50 people and above. It doesn't make sense, but we can fix this. We can take the code, we can take the legislation, and we can put a common sense element in there that allows the businesses to say, wait a minute, this doesn't make sense. We don't have to go to Superior Court and spend tens and $20,000 and $30,000 fighting in Superior Court. We can have another mechanism right here in a room like this where people can say, this is how we're going to deal with it. And that's something that I propose to change.
Okay, thank you. And Ms. Terry?
I am a huge supporter of Maine businesses. I have had several myself, and regulations can certainly tax a business owner, without a doubt. Cutting through red tape is one of the hardest things to do as a business owner. At the same time, there are reasons for regulations. A regulation just doesn't pop up out of nowhere. It's something that's discussed, a law is passed, and things are regulated for a reason. I'm in the food business. Imagine if the food business was not regulated. I could make something for you and poison you, and that would be the end of it. And there would be no recourse for you. So I think that regulations are very important. I think that they need to be widely discussed before being passed, but then once passed, they need to be met. The regulations need to be met in order for business to succeed.
We're going to move on now to another important ballot issue, and this is, again, another question where we're going to allow everyone to answer without shuffling around with other questions. And that issue is, do you want to require background checks prior to the sale or transfer of firearms between individuals not licensed as firearms dealers, with failure to do so punishable by law and with some exceptions made for family members, hunting, self-defense, lawful competitions, and shooting range activity?
This is a press release that just came out a couple of days ago from the Maine sheriffs. And I think, Mr. McLean, if you live in a neighborhood in which you're worried about your kids getting shot on the way to school, then you should go carrying a gun, period. Let me read you this. I'm just going to take this straight out of the press release from the Maine sheriffs. This measure will do nothing to stop evil people from getting their hands on guns. In fact, all relevant data indicates that criminals acquire firearms through theft and the black market. This initiative will not stop the recurring pattern. We live in one of the safest states in the country and strongly believe that no provisions in this legislation would reduce gun violence or crime in Maine. In fact, question 3 is unenforceable, confusing, poorly written, and threatens to make law-abiding gun owners into criminals for simply loaning a firearm to a friend. Period. Thank you.
And Ms. Terry, your response.
Again, for the voters to decide to go to legislation and the rules to be made. I do support this. I see no reason to not have background checks for everybody. A gun is a deadly weapon. A car can be a deadly weapon. We register our cars. There's no reason why we shouldn't register our guns. We register our cars when we buy it from a family member. Why wouldn't we register guns for the same reason? There is really bad problem with gun violence all over this country. True, criminals will get away with what criminals can possibly get away with, but why not try to stop them while they can?
Isn't the high cost of operating in Maine mostly due to energy, or is it not? What can Maine do to provide a more reliable supply of energy that is also more cost efficient? And are there any other methods that can be used to encourage businesses in Maine? Ms. Terry, we'll start with you.
I think there's probably a million reasons for people to come to Maine to start businesses, but we'll stick with the energy one. So energy costs are a real problem. I think that we have the opportunity in Maine to look forward and progressively change our energy policies for more renewable resources. We do rely heavily on oil. My house is heated by it. Our cars are run by it. So if our energy our energy needs can be met with wind and solar power, then I think that they should be met with solar and wind power. Job creations, for starters, not taxing our earth, our land, and again, for the future of our children having jobs to our children having a home, an earth to live on. I think that renewable energy is the way to go. It will cost to start these structures, but then once they're in use, they'll pay for themselves. Mother Nature is pretty much free.
Thank you. And Mr. Mattingly, your response on this issue?
Thank you. I'm not sure that this discussion that this issue with Bath Iron Works is really about energy. I think there's a lot of other issues into the losing that contract. But if we want to talk about energy as a part of as part of life, whether you're a residence or your business, I mean, we have to have a coherent energy policy, and we don't. The cumulative energy costs for the average resident in Maine, between heating, between gas, between electric, is between $600 and $700 a month. We have 49% higher energy costs than the national average. Now, is that the reason for Bath Iron Works losing that contract? Not on its own. I mean, frankly, in 2015, Forbes magazine said we're the third worst state in the nation to conduct business in. He blames and the article blames that on one of the highest corporate tax burdens in the nation. So I think that if we're going to talk about being competitive from a business perspective, we need to talk about some other things. We need to talk about the differences between a right-to-work state and where we are today. We need to talk about, and since my opponent mentioned wind power, I happened to print this up earlier, and I just thought this was fascinating, and I know you really can't see it, but this is from the U.S. Department of Energy, and this shows you all these areas in white. You can see that. According to them, these are poor areas for wind. Poor areas, and this is where we're building. This is the areas where they say, yeah, don't build here, but we're going to build there. Now, I do like the idea of the offshore wind farms that have been percolating in development through some grants and through our university systems, and I think those have a lot of promise. But why we're spending, those facilities would not even remotely pay for themselves in the open free market. We have to pump millions of tax dollars into them, and people are getting rich off of our tax dollars for energy systems that do not work at this point in this juncture in our technology. Maybe they will in the future. Today they don't work. This is all boils down into does the state have the proper economic climate to move forward? Yes or no? You can make up your mind.
The candidates for District 26, and we'll begin with Mr. Mattingly. Your closing remarks.
Thank you. Appreciate your efforts tonight and herding the cats here and keeping us in line. We appreciate your valiant attempt. I was just thinking, and I did not prepare any closing responses, but I was just thinking, how many of us in Gorham, have our kids, and my two girls are in college right now, and the reality is I don't see them coming back after graduation. And I wonder how many people can think about that today. And with kids that are in school, think about your own kids. We're middle school, high school. think for just a second that when they leave for college, that'll be the last time you probably live near them. And that's the situation because of a lot of factors. One, because we are over-regulating. We're allowing special interest groups to tax the job creators that are going to build the base that will allow them to stay here or to come back here and find employment. We're eliminating the entry-level jobs for our kids through the minimum wage issues. We are overburdening people with simply taking a shotgun and saying, hey, go out and borrow this for the weekend. I mean, we have this concept that we just want to add to the regulations, add to the taxes, and we're not in a state that has the luxury of, we cannot afford those kind of mistakes. And I want my kids to come back here. I want them to come back here and find a life that is the life that I remember when I grew up here before I left. And I was one of those who left as a kid. I left for 20 some odd years and I came back and I realized when I returned that the state wasn't quite the same as I had left it 20 some odd years earlier. But you know what? We can do something about it. We can make the state great again. We can put our minds together, we can put our hearts together, and we can come forward with a plan for the future that will ensure that everyone lives here the way we want people to live here.